Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the session, and I welcome you to this webinar. So I muted all of the mics just for not having a lot of trouble in the parasite of unmuting yourselves by mistake. I'm gonna let you, of course, unmute them whenever there's any questions. So our session today, as said, is about the risk assessment and even what is the life cycle of a project. Now, to be able to discuss all of these details that we are talking about, first of all, we need to understand what is a project by itself. So when we say a project, what are we referring to, and what does that mean? What is a project? It is defined in the, let's say, a kind of resource, which is the PMBOK guide. It is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result, which means whenever we are working on a certain project, we have a certain result and we have a certain goal or a certain target that we want to achieve. And when we say we want to achieve, which means that we are working for a time frame on this goal or on this target to be able to reach it. There's a variety in the kinds of projects. Not all projects are alike. What does that mean? Which means that there are some easy projects and there are some complex projects. So there's a kind of complexity that is present in some of the projects, which means some projects are harder than the others, some projects are more complex than the other, but at the end, they both follow something that we call a life cycle. Whether the project is simple, whether it is complex, they will all follow the same life cycle. All projects, they have deliverables, which means that they have to result something. They have a result. They always produce something. We always have a result from this kind of project. We cannot spend a certain time frame working on something without even knowing what the result is, or if it didn't have any kind of result in the first place. Examples of some projects, they can be a new product, a building renovation. A wedding is also a project, and a dinner party, because for a wedding and a dinner party, you have to prepare and you will also have to plan for these events. The planning for these events means that you are working in the project life cycle. In definition, to define what the word project means, we say that people and organizations, they have what a project is or should be. But of course, probably the definition is, as it's mentioned, there's a guide to project management. So the answer to everything that is being asked is that a project management, it is essentially a management of changement, which means that in the phase of a certain project, let's say some new stuff might happen, some problems might occur, some updates will be required. So in the phase of a project, whenever we need to manage a project, which means that we have to expect every kind of update that is going to happen while the project is running. So to dig deeper into that, a project management, it's not applicable to running a factory, as we say, making sausage pies, as we are giving this example. The objectives, which are usually defined as a part of the business case, and they are set out in a project brief, they have three criteria. There are always three criteria for every single project that comes to your mind. And these criteria, they are stable, they never change in all of the projects, they are the same. It must be, first of all, completed on time, because if you were asked when you are going to deliver and when will this project be delivered, and of course you give a delivery date, then you have to complete your project on time. This is the first criteria. The project must be always completed on time. The second criteria is that there is some kind of cost. So you have a budget for this project. This budget, it cannot be exceeded. So whenever your target is a certain project, and you have a certain cost or you have a certain budget to work with, this means that you have to respect this budget and you should not exceed it, because this is going to cause financial problems. So the project must be accomplished within the budgeted cost that we are talking about. Also, the quality performance, which means it should meet the quality requirements. So if you are asked for something, you cannot, after the life cycle or after the hard work on the project, deliver something else or deliver something that is completely different. This cannot be done. So the criteria of the project is that it should meet the requirements. Also, the third criteria, it should meet the requirements of the customer, or it should meet the requirements of the manager. So whenever you are working on a project, as a result, you should meet all of the requirements that are asked from you. These three criteria, they make up something which we call the safety. Whenever you meet these three criteria, you are in the safe zone, or you are working safely in your project throughout the entire life cycle. Because if your project is delivered on time and you respect the budget, you respect the cost, and you are meeting the requirements in the quality performance, which means that you are delivering a perfect project and you are working on something good and you are respecting all of the criteria, so you are safe and your project is yet to be successful. This is the safety zone of your project. Any questions till now?
No, so far. Thank you.
No question, no question. We understood time, cost, and the quality. We understood. No more question.
Okay, perfect.
And hello.
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. And thank you for
Good
your
afternoon.
presentation. And I would like to ask a question regarding the project criteria, which you have mentioned it, and the three criteria, on time and budget cost and the scope. So, and my question is, there is a lot of projects going on in the world, and they are different. So, do you mean all the projects which are existing, they have the same criteria? Thank you.
Every project will have its own management. If we're talking about two projects that are working in a similar way, every project has its management, but all projects, they should be working on these criteria, and the criteria, they will differ from a project to another, because a certain project will need, maybe it will need 1 month to be delivered, another one will need 6 months, this one will need this much of cost, the other will need that much. So the criteria will vary between a project and the other, but they are all, the three criteria, they are the same, and they are always followed up in all of our projects, especially when managing any kind of project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So to continue, now there is something that we add, which is a fourth criteria. In certain industries, like there's the airlines, the railways, the minings. So we are talking here about some dangerous, let's say we can call them as dangerous businesses. So this dangerous business, it will require a lot more of safety. Now, the difference over here between what we were talking before and what we are talking now is the difference of the safety. In the past example, the safety, it was a combination of the three criterias. They were being the safety, which are the time, the cost, and the quality. Now, in this example, when we are talking about these kinds of businesses and these kinds, let's say, of projects that are depending on airlines, on minings, and that they have, let's say, they have some dangerous part on the life of the worker or the life of the human resource that is working in this project. It may affect directly their lives and their health. This means safety now becomes a main criteria, not just a combination of three criterias, because as you can realize, the cost is still there, the time is still there, and the quality performance, it is still there. But now we are adding a fourth criteria, which is the safety. The safety will now become a very, it's going to become a very main criteria, of course, depending on these kinds of jobs or these kinds of projects, because they are going to influence directly on the life of a certain worker or on the life of our human resource that you are getting to manage this project. So the safety is something that is going to become a main criteria. It is my job, either as a project management or let's say, if not a manager, someone who has a role in this project, I should keep the safety criteria at the very top, because I cannot affect myself to get someone to work on this project and put his life in danger. So maybe he's going to be injured or maybe killed. This is where the safety becomes one of the four main criteria that we are discussing. So these are, of course, in certain industries, like the airlines, like the railways, like something that is the mining, like any kind of business or project that you might consider as it has a direct effect on the health or the life of a certain worker. This is where the safety becomes one of the main criteria. So now we are talking about four main criteria, not just three. The same three are still present over here, but in some industries, we add the safety as one of the main criteria. In fact, it is the most important one yet. There's something that we call the time-bound project, the cost-bound project, and the performance-bound project. The time-bound, as mentioned, it's a scoreboard for a prestigious, let's say, a tennis tournament. It must be finished on time for the opening match, even if it costs more than anticipated, and the display of some secondary information, such as speed of the service, it has to be abandoned. In other words, what we're talking about over here is that the cost and the performance, they may have to be sacrificed to meet the unalterable starting date of the tournament. So there are some points that we talk about in our projects, there are some, let's say, phases that we reach where we cannot go back. Because if you are talking about something big, like today, one of the examples that it may be given nowadays is the World Cup that is going to be held in Qatar. So what we are talking about is that you are preparing for this World Cup, but something yet comes into display, or something as a problem, it may occur, and you may need, let's say, some extra cost. We were mentioning before that the cost is something of the main criteria that should be always respected. In this case, though, that we are discussing now, you cannot imagine canceling the opening of the World Cup, or imagine, let's say, delaying or postponing the opening of such a huge event. Sometimes the cost and in some ways the performance, it has to be sacrificed in order to meet the target. This is what we call a time bound, because you may, of course, and referring to the management of this event, they will tell you that I'm ready to pay more, but we cannot sacrifice losing this project, or we cannot sacrifice delaying this project, neither postponing it or let's say risking its failure. As a cost-bound project, there's a local authority housing development. It may have to, let's say, curtail the number of housing units and may even overrun the original construction program. So as an example, but the project cost cannot be exceeded. This is another example of a cost bound. So this is the bound that has to be respected. In the first example, talking about the World Cup, there's the time bound at any means necessary. The time bound should not be exceeded. Now there's somewhere that the cost should not be exceeded. Why? Because if you are having a stakeholder, or if you are having, let's say, someone who is helping out financially in the project, you have a certain amount of money that you can never exceed. And at the end, if you try to negotiate to get maybe to increase the cost, then you're going to end up in a failure. Why? Because you have this certain amount that you can deal with, you have this certain amount that you can work with, and it can never be exceeded. So over here, the time bound and the performance are the ones to be sacrificed, but yet the cost should be respected. Now we are talking, of course, over here about some exceptional cases, because there is some messing around with the criteria. Either they are all respected, because if one of them was not, that is going to cause a problem for the management. And maybe talking about the performance bound project. As a performance bound project, what you should not exceed is the requirements and the quality and what is asked from this management as a result for this project, whatever it costs. So I'm going to say that if I have to delay the delivery of this project, I'm going to have to delay it because I want to meet the requirements of the customer, or I want to meet the requirement of the manager. So in these three cases, we are talking about some exceptional cases where in the time bound, everything can be sacrificed, but the time and the delivery, it should be respected. In the cost bound example, the cost that's yet to be respected can never be exceeded, which means that other, let's say other stuff, they can be. And the performance, which is the fourth example, where the requirements of what is being asked for can never be exceeding depending on anything that might come up to the minds. Okay, let me give you permission just to unmute. Any questions on these three till now? Are they clear?
Clear.
Very clear. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, perfect. Going on. There are some basics of the project management that we should always also take care of, and we should always understand. What are these basics? These basics at some way, they are 4 questions. 4 questions as a manager or as a team of management, you should always ask yourselves. The answers to these questions are going to be the planning, or they are going to be the roadmap, or they are going to be what is allowed to be done and what is to be respected. The first question is, what is the project management? We have to understand, what is this project? What are we working on? What are we aiming to find? What are we aiming to get? What are we aiming to reach? So there's the what that we are working on. Understanding the what is understanding what is this project about. Then comes another question, which is the who. The who, now we are talking about the hierarchy or this tree of management, which means who is responsible in this project? Who are the ones responsible? Who's the manager? Who's the team leader? Who's the regular employee? So who are the people that are involved in this project, and what are their roles? The third question is how to structure. How to structure, which means we're going to see in a minute that we will be talking about some phases in the project life cycle, which are the where to start, implementation, execution, delivery. So the initiation, we have these 4 targets. The third question is about how to build the structure of this project. When we say the structure of this project, which means that we are going to give these 4 phases, beginning, and we're going to see them. These 4 phases are going to be explained. Every phase is going to have its time frame, is going to have its time limit. So we are building over here the structure of our project. How to manage. This is going to be like a checklist or a certain task list that the manager or the team leader or the one responsible to follow up this stuff is going to have in his hand. And of course, he's going to be working on it to follow up on how to manage and to follow up on all the tasks. If this one is completed, something is missing, any problems occurred. So there's going to be always a follow-up. These 4 questions are the basics of any project management, of any project lifecycle. What is to understand what is the project, the who are the ones involved, the responsibilities, the roles, structure of the project as the phases, and how to manage the project. Now we talk about the project lifecycle. We were mentioning some of the steps of the lifecycle of the project, but let's see in details what are they. First of all, there are 4 main steps that can be followed by a 5th one. Stage number 1 in the project lifecycle, the first stage is the initiation. So you have to initiate your project. What is required to put the project into action? So how to fire, let's say, or how to start the management of this project, or how to even start this project, how to start working on it, I mean. This is the initiation, which is, of course, the first stage. After the initiation and after starting the actual work, comes next another stage, which is the planning. The planning process, it is something extremely important because it is going to be the phases that all of the plans are being put, all of the plans are being discussed in details through all the phases. Everything is going to be understood throughout this planning process, which is going to be a planning process for the end of the project. So it is going to be working till the end of the project. This planning phase, it might include who are the persons that will be involved, what will be the milestones, how will success be measured, and what are the risks. So how am I going to measure that this project was successful? How am I going to measure that I have reached a successful phase in this project? This is yet also to be discussed. And what are the risks that we might face in such project? So this is stage number 2, the planning. After doing the plan and after discussing the entire plan, finishing the planning process, you move on to something which is the execution. The execution is, of course, implementing this planning process. All right. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Mohammed, go ahead. You can ask your question now.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much. I want to ask you in stage 2, planning.
Yes.
Okay, can you put in another word or explanation in more the word of milestone? You can explain or put in another meaning of that word of milestone. What does it mean?
All right. So in the planning process, when we talk about a milestone, which means we are setting up beside a road, we say, what does a milestone mean? It is setting up beside a road, a marking the distance in miles. So where have we reached so far? In project management, what we can say as a milestone is that we have to follow up on what we have reached. So we have reached here, we have reached this process, now we are here, now we are there. So it's kind as being meant as a follow-up on every phase that we reach. Because the word milestone as its word, it is, let's say, marking up the road that you are taken to be able to understand and to figure out where have you reached so far. In a project management or in the management or any kind of project, how do we deal with that is also to, let's say, mark up where we have reached in this project so far, so that we can understand what yet is still missing, or where are we now at which step. Is it clear?
Yes, teacher. Thank you very much. I am understood now. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Welcome. So stage number 3 is the execution, which is implementing what has been planned. So what is getting done? What's happening and what are we doing by hand? Which means all of the resources that we got, what are they going to do? And what are they actually going to implement? This is the execution part. Now, of course, there's going to be a part where we're going to talk into details, and we're going to talk in details about each and every step. But after the execution, which is the stage number 4, and this one should always be happening throughout all of the stages, which is the management. The management, which means in every stage, even the initiation, even the planning, even the execution, you have to understand how's the progress going, what information or data are coming out from this phase, and what information or data can we conclude or can we understand from this phase that we are working on. So there should always be a management. Either this can be a person or a team of specialists that are following up on every phase as worked on to be able to manage all of the processes of the project. The last step, which is mainly how a project ends, it is the review or having some feedbacks. So what happens in the project that went well, what was bad, what is something that could be, let's say, fixed. It could have been dealt with in a better way. So a review should happen with the team or the management team of this project They have to meet up again, just like they did on the planning process, and they have to give their feedbacks, and they have to give their remarks, their notes on everything that happened throughout the entire process. From the initiation to the delivery, they have to do some reviews and to collect some feedbacks that will be a huge plus for any upcoming project. So these are the main phases of the project lifecycle that we discuss and we always talk about. They are the same that are followed in mostly the entire projects. They are the same. What is a life cycle in definition? It is a series of phases that we just discussed of a project, starting from its initiation till the delivery or the completion of the project. It gives a practical approach to problem solving applied to all the aspects of a project. Phases in this life cycle, they encompass sequential and overlapping phases. So we always have to follow them in a sequential way. You cannot execute something without a planning. So this is the, let's say, the very first example that can be given over these phases. You cannot jump to the execution phase missing the planning one. A project life cycle, it typically has 4 major phases that we discuss. We have the initiation, the planning, implementation or execution, and the closure phase. These are the ones that we just saw. The closure phase, this is what we mean whenever the project is delivered. More explanation about the 4 phases. The initiation one, the project needs a definition. It needs to be identified in the initiation phase. It signals the start of a project. So this is the first phase that signals that the project has started. This is where the project should be defined, should be for all of the team. They should be understanding what we are doing and what we are aiming to reach. Next comes the planning phase, which is where every kind of problem is yet to be whole. And this is where we explore, as mentioned, the steps necessary to achieve our goals. Of course, afterwards comes the execution phase. As discussed, it is what actually happens and what we implement from the planning phase that we were talking about. This is where the plan, we say in words, it is put into action. This is when people start carrying out tasks, they start working on them, and they start executing what was being planned in the previous phase. Finally comes the closure, which is the final step of every project. The closure phase, when do you know that the project is over? First of all, when we deliver successfully the project to the customer or to the manager, or handing the project to whomever was requiring the project. Yet afterwards, I'm going to add a step, which is, in my personal opinion, very important. The project should end whenever the review meeting is done. So every project should have a review at its end, collecting feedbacks, putting the dots on everything that happened throughout the project. Now, before we move to anything, there is something which is yet always to be discussed, which is a point called a risk management. In these 4 phases, where is the highest percentage of having any kind of problems? So at which phase should the risks be managed or taken into consideration? Various answers over here with many explanations can come up. Mohammed, okay, go ahead. You have the hand up. Okay, whenever you want, you can jump in. Going ahead. So there can be over here a various, let's say, thoughts might come and various answers with, of course, multiple justifications. So what we are talking about over here is at what phase should the risk be assessed properly? The risk management, it cannot be over one phase. So every phase of these four main, it should have a risk management process. Ibrahim, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just trying to answer your question. When
Yes, go ahead. What do you think?
Identified. Yeah, I think planning stage is the stage where you need to identify any risks, because if you don't identify any risks in the planning stage, then you will have problem in the implementation phase. I think this is my thinking. Thank you.
All right, very good answer. So this is what I was mentioning, which is that we can have multiple thoughts, we can have various thoughts, even with, of course, various justifications that are all correct. Why are they all correct? Because if you come and tell me that in the planning phase, it is most important to assess the risks and to manage the risks, or if you say that in the initiation phase, or in the closure phase, or in the implementation phase, I'm going to tell you that all of these are true. Why? Because a risk management can happen in all of the phases. If you come and think about it in the initiation phase, what is the risk management in the initiation phase? It is the risk that you cannot assemble a team, or you cannot find the appropriate persons to be able to work with you on this project. So this is the first risk that you might face in the first phase, which is the initiation phase. Over here is the assembling of the team. As an example, of course, there might come up multiple, let's say, multiple reasons. So there can be something which is regarding the cost, because the cost is yet to be discussed in the initiation phase. Whenever you initiate it, which means that you are also understanding what type of cost that you are working with. So these are two main examples. If you take a look also on the planning phase, what are the risks in the planning phase? Maybe over here, this has multiple of points that can be discussed. And one of them is what our colleague just mentioned, which is that if we assess the risks in a correct way, whenever we are planning the project, this is going to affect the implementation phase. That is true. That is yet to be true. But if you take also into consideration, there are some stuff that might suddenly happen. So might suddenly happen, which means unexpectedly, you might face some problems in other phases that also they should be solved, and they should be handled on the, let's say, on the phase or on the set whenever they happen. Because if a certain problem occurs, and you are in the implementation phase, you started executing and you have already started implementing, you cannot go back to planning. So you cannot step back. What is yet to be happened over here? The appropriate solution is to solve every kind of problem that happens on its place, which means there's also going to be a risk assessment in the execution phase, because suddenly we have faced a certain problem, suddenly something came up to our attention in the project, and we have to deal with it. So this is a certain risk that we are working on. And another phase, which is not the planning, because the general answer for that, or the typical answer that everyone first of all answers, which is that in the planning phase, you should always assess the risks and take into consideration all of the kind of the risks that might happen, anything that you might face. That is true. We cannot say that this answer is wrong, but to be even more exact and to give it its pretty much better option or better right, we assess risks in every phase that we work on. Okay, no problem. I'm gonna allow the questions throughout the session so that they cannot be to the end. I have a question from Haji. You can go ahead. You can unmute.
Yes, thank you. And I don't have a question, but I would like to add my understanding according to the project life cycle, especially when it comes to safety. And you know, as you have mentioned it, every stage of project management has a risk. And I think the main aim is to reduce the risk, because there is a risk assessment. And for example, when we at the stage of planning, we have to do risk assessment unless we go to closure or the review stage. So the main aim of the training is to reduce the risk of the project, because we know every project has a risk. Thank you.
Thank you. Exactly, very good point, which is every project has a risk. And even if you want to go into more details, every phase, it has a risk. Why? Because in every phase, you might face any kind of problem. Even in the closure, don't ever think that if we are in the closure phase that we are far from facing any risks. The first risk that you might face in the closure is meeting the delivery date, or if the requirements are fulfilled in front of the customer. Is he happy? Did he receive successfully? Was he handed successfully the project or the result or whatever you were working on? So there is always risks. The thing over here is to reduce them and to have backup plans. Always have backup plans. Always have a plan B in case something went wrong, something happens, something is risky enough to cause the project to fail. So this should always be taken into consideration as well. Into more details, the initiation phase, it is the first phase, as mentioned, to explore the project concept. The scope is defined during this phase. The feasibility, so we already mentioned all of these, just going over them in a quick way. The feasibility studies are made in order to identify if there's a business need and justification to pursue the project. So the charter is developed for approval. This is the phase that the project team is assembled and the manager is identified. So as I mentioned in the initiation, also there is responsibility as to be able to assemble the team. And this is one of the risks that you might face in this initiation phase, assembling the team, gathering the team. And also the manager of this project is yet to be identified, because you need to know who's in charge. You cannot proceed in a project, even you cannot start the planning without identifying who is in charge, because he is going to be the one putting up the dots and nearly lighting up the points, even in the planning process. The planning phase, it is the phase that has all of the details of all of the scopes of the project. As of course we were talking about, the phase where further details to the scope of the project from the initiation phase to the execution, to the closure, to all of the phases that we might go through. This is where the plan is made up. And yet more importantly, this is where the tasks and the resources are identified and assigned. So if you are a, let's say, if you are someone as a human resource employee, someone who's participating in this project, in this phase, this is where the tasks are being distributed. The manager of the project, he is the one coordinating the preparation and the schedule and the budget of the project with stakeholders, if they exist, or whoever is funding the project. So this is why the project manager should be identified in the initiation project, because he has his own tasks to handle in this phase, which is the planning one. Risks are identified ahead to anticipate any project threats. So mainly this is the phase, as mentioned, where a lot of risk assessment is happening, a lot of risk management is happening, but yet, as mentioned also, it's not the only phase where risks are being assessed and managed, because in another phase, there may be something sudden that might occur. There may be something sudden that might come up in your way. So you have to always be ready. But generally, in this phase, this is where in a certain meeting, all of the risks are put into the table, are being discussed, are being handled, let's say coordinated between each other. The quality plan is developed to maintain proper standards throughout the project. So this is where also the quality of the work is being maintained, and we put the standards of this quality because it's going to be followed up through the entire project. Communications plan is created in order to ensure everyone is constantly informed of the status of the project. So you have to always update the team. You cannot just distribute tasks and let them be and let them go. So you have to always update the team with the status of the project. Now we are here. Now we are there. And this is what was asked before, which is the milestone. This is the perfect explanation for what a milestone is in the planning phase. So now you have even a more clear answer. Everyone should be updated at all time with the status of your project. The implementation phase is where the work outlined in the plan is being executed and performed. Just like we said, it is the implementation of what has been already planned. This phase, it consumes the most resources, energy. Of course, the entire energy is put in the implementation phase because this is where the actual tasks are being finished, are being executed, also are being implemented. Constant and close monitoring of the work, it should be done to ensure efficiency of the project execution. There cannot be tasks running around without a monitor over them or without someone from the management who is responsible monitoring everything that is happening in order to catch all of the problems, in order to behave well, in order to keep the project running smoothly. Status reports as well, they are extremely important for all stakeholders that are involved, because this stakeholder is not giving you his money for nothing. Of course, he has a certain cut, he has a certain benefit from being in this project. So the stakeholders, either one or many, they should always be updated with the status of the project. Deliverables, they are measured against the set of metrics to ensure quality is acceptable. The closure phase, which is the final phase, which is where actual projects are ending. So it is the last phase of a project life cycle. This is where handing over the final delivery to the customer happens or takes place. Contracts are terminated properly for equipment vendors and staff. What do we mean by contracts are properly terminated? Whenever you terminate the contract, which means the staff at the minimum, the first example, they should all be paid what, of course, they were promised. All stakeholders are to be informed of project closure. This is, of course, out of profession. You should always inform the stakeholder that we are done and the project is closed and we actually finished. Also, this phase is when the team reviews the overall project and identifies lessons learned for future projects. As mentioned, this review meeting is extremely important to happen. So these are the processes that take place. This is how the phases go from initiation to planning, implementation, also to deliveries. We say that although they sound like phases, processes are not phases. This graph is a representation of when these processes, they typically occur on the project life cycle. Any kind of process at any percentage. You see that in the initiation phase, the processes are minimal. They go up in the planning, go even more up in the execution, and then go back down in the closure phase. Because already we mentioned that the extreme energy, all 90% of the energy is put in the execution phase. To talk about the initiating the process group, this is typically occurring during the initiation phase of a project. These process groups, they define a new project or phase objectives that is needed to achieve. It involves obtaining authorization for the project if needed. Process group, the main output is the project charter and the stakeholder register. So again, identification. In the planning process as well, there's a lot of these to mention. There's something like developing the plan, scope management, requirements, scopes, and a lot more. This is where the plan risk management as well. It is the, as mentioned, identifying risks, also stakeholder management. So there's a lot going on in this phase. This is important to mention, which is that a skilled project manager knows how much time and effort is put into each stage of planning as the project changes. So if there's any kind of update that is happening in any kind of project, if you are a project manager with the skills, and this is how you consider yourself as a good manager and someone with high skills in managing a project, you can directly, let's say, digest any kind of update that suddenly occurs on your project and that you might suddenly face in order to be adapting the project. So you have to be adapting the entire life cycle with any update that might suddenly occur. Of course, one set of skill also to mention for a good project manager is in the planning phase, being able to identify each phase, how many, or let's say approximately the exact time that it's going to need. Because you know that sometimes in the beginning, the customer asks, when do I expect a delivery date? The execution process, and this is where the everything direct of jobs happening, acquiring the team, developing project teams. So this is what occurs typically in the execution phase and where the energy is pretty much put on. The closing process group, which is the final phase, is the closure. Every kind of process that happens at this closure as a formal transfer to the customer, administrative closure. This is somehow over here, we say it's the termination of the projects. Monitoring and controlling. This is a process that should happen throughout the entire life cycle, which is that we should always monitor and control the work and the project, change control, validate the scope, control it, schedules, costs, quality, communication between sectors, risks, procurements, stakeholders engagement as well, because many stakeholders, they love to be engaged in the project, so we should control that as well. From my side, this is all I have to say. I hope everything was clear. I'm gonna open now to any questions that you might have. So you have the permissions to unmute yourselves, but please raise your hands. Okay, Rhoda, go ahead.
Thank you very much, dear Prof. Well explanation. So I don't have any question about this season. All understand. All I'm requesting, can we get BBT?
Yes, of course, they're going to be sent to you through emails.
Email. Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful comments. So if someone has any questions, you can raise your hand and you can directly ask. Rather than that, of course, I want to thank you for being here and listening to this wonderful webinar that you experienced. I hope that you have gained a lot from it, because everything that was discussed, it has, and it can be elaborated also in more and more details, but we tried to go over everything with, let's say, the minimum of what should be understood. So there's no questions. You can leave the session, and of course I'm gonna thank you again for being here. Okay, we have a question from Gapshi Governor. You can go ahead.
Yes, Professor, thank you. We have just understood the lesson, and I'm saying to you, thank you very much. I was very lucky the way you are explaining in the lesson, and we have understand very well. Thank you and welcome with open hands. Wish you successful, dear sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the wonderful words. Really means a lot. A hand up from, I don't know how to spell the name though. Kabdir Rassak, I think.
Yes, my teacher, I will thank you. First, I wanted to ask you if we last of project as we need a summary of this lesson. Do you have?
Yes, of course. So mainly we're going to send the entire thing, like the entire PowerPoint, at your disposal. And mainly it is It's a summary because I was elaborating the points and they are just bullets in this presentation. So mainly if you still need one, I can maybe create a summary and send it back to you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Welcome. All right. Thank you, everyone. This was an honor, and I was pretty much very happy with you.